Alright, friends and neighbors, welcome back to another networking video. Today we're going to do a DNS build on CentOS 8. So let's put together our checklist. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new VM, and that'll be my DNS server. You don't have to do that, right? I could install bind and bind utilities on an already existing VM, but we're going to do it from scratch because I'm going to do it with a server build. That's an option when you install CentOS. Now, after we get everything installed, then what we have to do, of course, is configure the server. So we're going to build a forward zone and a reverse zone, and we'll see what that looks like. And then we'll have a client that we got to configure to test our server. Of course, before we can do that, we got to run the service, figure out how to get requests through the firewall, things like that. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the files. So there's a collection of files that need to work together. The first one is named-checkconf, and that one is going to have the actual definition for your domain in there. The second one that we're going to talk about is the forward zone, or the forward zone file, and that is where we're going to have all of our name server and address records. So that's our forward lookup. That's the lookup that we're used to doing. I need the IP address that goes with this name. Okay, the reverse zone is also one that we're going to set up, which says if I want to look up an IP address, what's the name that goes along with that? So there we have it. So those are our main files. Now there are a couple of other files, right? We could do something with loopback, and then also when you do a build, there's a root server file or a hinting file for the root servers called named-d.ca. But let's get on to our actual build. So as I said, I'm going to do a new VM for this. So we're going to go ahead and set that up right now. And again, we're going to do CentOS 8. There we go. Linux, yep. And we will call this CentOS DNS. I'm going to store it as a single file. It's just a personal preference. And we're going to be natted, so that's fine for right now because we've got to do the install. Alright, so let's power up our VM. And so what I'm going to do is I'll get us to the point in the install where it actually starts, and then we'll pause the video because I don't want it to be 4 years long. Boop-da-bop-bop, boop-da-bop, boop-da-bop-bop, boop-da-bop. We're starting up. And as always, I'm going to do everything that I would have you do if you were going to build it. And if I make mistakes, I'll leave them right in there because you're going to make mistakes in config files unless you're just awesome. So that's the way that we're going to work this too. I'll cut it for length, you know, or if I sit here and contemplate my navel for too long, then I'll cut those out. But everything that I do will be part of this video. Do 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 do. Hey, there we go. So English, that's me, sure. All right, so one of the things we want to make sure that we do is turn on our network. We're done with that. Take care of our partitioning, yeah, sure, looks good. Boom, boom. Give me a second here. Installation source. I guess we could do, while it's figuring things out here, we could do the root password. Passwords do not match. Oh, great. What did I do? Oh, maybe it's... Aha, that's what I did. There we go. Okay, installation source, closest mirror. I like that. That's fine. Now, one of the things that you'll occasionally get an error on the install is if you don't have your network up, it can't figure out where your installation source is. So, pro tip: make sure you get your network interface up. All right. So, which option do we want here with our software selection? Now, in CentOS 7. We're used to being able to select, server with a GUI and then maybe see DNS pop up right over here. But this is CentOS 8, and so which one do we use? Now, as I said, we could do the command line, and maybe we'll have to do that. But just for fun, let's see what options we have. Well, I'm not seeing anything that's really obvious as far as DNS. But we do see this network server. So maybe we'll just try that, see what happens. There we go, and we'll begin the installation. Now, I decided to do a server instead of a server with a GUI because I'm just going to try and save a little bit of time. But I'll pause the recording right here, and we'll come back when we're fully installed. Okay, we're back. So the install has run through, and we're here at the first login. So that's not going to work. Okay, so the question was, it wasn't obvious whether or not DNS or bind was installed, so why don't we do something like this? Wow, that doesn't look good. So let's also do... So we don't see named here. It's probably nothing in /etc either, so I'm going to go ahead and install bind. Well, that would certainly indicate that it needed to be installed. And there's named. All right, so the first thing I think that we'll do is maybe we'll do the named-checkconf file in etc. Okay, so what we have to do here is define the domain that we're going to use. So if we take a look down here, right, so these are all the options, but what we need here is a zone definition. So let's go ahead and add that. Now, let me see, what zone should I use? Well, I think the zone that did I say what I was going to use in the slides? Hold on one second. Yeah, I did. So let's go ahead and use this mine.bruce.com.dns. We'll use well, that'll be the name of the forward lookup file, but let's put that in, put the domain anyway in named-checkconf. Now, one of the other things that is good to point out here is that punctuation is very, very important in these files. Well, let's actually make some of the files really easy to find. Now, whatever file I want to use here, I have to make sure that I use the exact name that that I call the file. So actually, to make things really clear, let's go ahead and make it forward.bruce.com. Okay, and yeah, I think that'll. And actually, let's make it really clear what's going on here. We'll do that. No reason to complicate things, and that'll do it. Now we're also going to need a reverse lookup for our zones. So let's do, now the reverse zones have kind of a funny naming convention. So the zone is actually the reverse of whatever your IP address is going to be, because that's actually the way that it reads it. So I think the, let's see, the IP address scheme that I pick here, pick something in the 172. And then we're going to add some keywords and tricky phrases at the end of this here. So, whoops, that's not going to work. Now again, this will be the exact name of the file that we're going to use. I don't know what we can get away with. Lots of folks like to preface this with DB or something like that. So we're going to do yeah, it looks like I forgot the keyword here. So we'll stick that in there. And looks okay. One thing we can take a peek at before we leave this, we've got the directory here, and this sort of tells us where we've got to put those zone files. And then also we have this allow query line. Now this may be a problem for us later on, because this says localhost, so this is not allowing queries from anybody else. Oop. Now we have the ability to check the file real quick, and in this case, no response is a good response. And so that looks pretty good. All right, let's navigate over to var named. And now we're going to create our forward zones. Now, because I just created these zones on the fly, there's no telling if I'll actually remember exactly how they're supposed to be. So I will try, and then whatever errors we run into, well, that's what we're going to have to fix. So let's start with our forward file. And I think I just called that forward.bruce.com. Now a lot of folks like to have the .dns on there. You certainly could. Actually, it's probably a recommended practice, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. Now there's a whole bunch of options here, and the syntax is really, really important. So let's just be mindful of that as we're going. So I've got notes next to me here. I encourage you to have some notes too while you're writing this, but without further ado, here we go. The forward lookup zone file for Bruce.com. So the first thing that we need is a time to live entry. So we're going to do that like this. Now the next line is probably one of the more important. It has these directives here, origin, and this is one of the things that we've got to be consistent about, and this allows you to just put that in front of everybody else, and then that assumes that all of the lines or all of the references to this are all using the same value in this directive. So for us, that's Bruce.com. Now another important line here is our start of authority. In this line we want to name our name server. So I'm just going to do the standard convention, ns1@bruce.com, and then that's followed by an email. So something like that. Let me see, I like it. Oh, let's make sure we put in our dots at the end. All right. Now the next set of fields is all of our timers that are associated with how the servers interact with each other, how long entries live, things of that sort. Now the first one is a serial number that lets somebody know whether or not they have the most up-to-date information. So it's very commonly a date, and then if you make changes, it's a good idea to increment the serial number. What's today? Do that. So we'll just say that this is the serial number. We have our refresh. Update retry. Expiry. Oops. And then maybe our minimum lifetime. Okay, so that's good for the timers associated with this particular zone. So all of this so far has to do with the start of authority. And I've said that the start of authority here is my name server. So what we got to do now is describe who the name server is. Right, so that we have this record now that indicates that our name server is part of the domain. Whoops. Let's add this. There we go. Now, let's add an address record for that name server. Now, the nice thing about doing it this way is because we've got the origin in there, we get to automatically assume that ns1 means ns1 at bruce.com or ns1.bruce.com. And what will our address be? Well, we'll just make it easy. We'll make it .0 or .1. And I forgot another period there. Now let's make one more entry here for our client. And I don't know, we'll just call it client 1. And 16. And now, of course, we now know that that'll be client1.bruce.com. Now we could also put in here something called a canonical name entry. Why not? We'll do Dr. H. Now a canonical name is, sort of like a nickname. We'll talk more about that later on, but here's how we might put one in here. We've got to find some way to tie what I just typed in there to some other entry without adding another address line. So we'll say that this is a CNAME, and we'll just reference, not that, something like that. Okay, I think that about does it for our forward zone file. All right, so now we've got to make our reverse lookup zone file, and I'm trying to remember what I put down. So sometimes I'll open up another terminal. There we go. So here is the entry line. So we need a reverse.0.16.172. Oops. Okay, so all right, so this is very similar to what we did in the previous file, but this time we gotta figure out a way to write the entries so that we can get the name that goes with the IP address instead of the other way around. So a lot of this will be the same. Now, just like the previous origin statement allowed us to assume that everything was going to go bruce.com after whatever the name was, here we've got an IP address that's going to be appended to everything that we put on, and it's going to be the reverse. So our origin statement is going to look a little different. So for us, that looks something like this. So that is the part of the address that would be appended to every address that we see in the file. There we go. Oops. And so that signifies the reverse lookup. And now we got our start of authority line. Now, this is where things get a little bit different, right? Because these are the reverse lookups. So .1 is going to be prefaced by 172.16.0, which we see in the origin, and the .1 here is my name server. So I want a pointer to what? Well, I want a pointer to my name server. Jeez, I keep forgetting those periods. And let's add another one for our client. So hopefully I haven't left out too much in the way of punctuation or details, but that looks pretty good. Okay, let's save this. Now we have a basic problem here in that I've installed Bind and I've got theoretically my files configured, but I don't actually have a name server, right? I haven't changed the name of this file or this machine. I haven't changed the IP address of this machine, so we've got to take care of those as well. In fact, there's a DHCP server sitting on the NAT interface that I'm sitting on, so all of my addressing information is coming from there. So let's find out what our IP address is currently. So we're on the 192 network. We don't want to do that, and we've got ENS 33. So I'm going to edit my network configuration file. And we can see that we are set up for DHCP. And we don't want that. And I think it's that. We'll do 172.16.0.1. Set up the mask. We don't actually need a gateway, but we'll go ahead and put it in there. Just for fun. And that ought to do it. Okay, let's bring it back up. Well, I didn't want to activate. What did I do here in the file? Maybe I got a little nutty here. Whoops. There we go. Got a little crazy. So now let's see what our address is. There we go. Correct address on my name server. But let's go ahead and change the name of the name server. And for that, we're going to use hostname controller. And we'll use our friend sudo here. And NS1. There we go. Okay, so we've got the host name running. Or we got the host name changed, we got the IP address changed, we've done our configuration files. Have we run the service? Probably not. So it looks like we threw an error. So without going any farther, what we can do is see if we can track down the error with some of the tools that we have associated with named. Now I can look in var log messages and I can do the journal control here, but let's try something else first. Alright, so it wouldn't start, so we probably have errors in our files somewhere, so let's take a look at the files, but we can also run another tool called checkzone. So let's try that. Oops. And we'll do So what does it say here? It says an error loading the file because start of authority record not at the top of the zone. So we got to take a look at that. So let's edit the file real quick. Alright, so I take a quick look at this and I see it looks like I forgot a period. So let's try that. Did I forget any other periods? My columns look okay. Alright. So let's try this again. Hey, look at that. Okay. Boy, punctuation makes all the difference. Alright, clear all that nonsense off. So I just ran the check zone on my reverse zone. Let's take a look at that named-checkconf and make sure that I didn't have anything screwed up in there. All right. Well, there's the zones that we added. Punctuation, brackets, punctuate. Oh. There we go. So let's try that. Let's go back over here. Should we try it again? Alright, so we missed some punctuation in the forward, we missed some punctuation in the reverse. Let's see, I just checked checked our named-checkconf. I missed some punctuation there. For heaven's sakes. Alright, that looks okay. We'll do the same thing, but we're going to do the reverse zone. So 0, oops. Yeah. Okay, I think we're finally okay to try our service again. So let's give it a whack. Why not? Haha, success. All right, so theoretically we have a name server that's up and running. We have a fully configured domain. We changed the name of our name server and we changed the IP address of our server. So let's try a query. Let's do one more thing. Let's do, we're going to edit this guy here. And we're going to add a name server that points to our name server, which is us. Now, one of the things that I should say about files like these, a lot of times they're overwritten. There's a lot of ways to do these. So if you have a network manager or something like that, all of this stuff will get overwritten. But for what we're doing right now, this will be all right. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. I got called away, but let's see if we can sort of recap. So what we've done so far is we edited the named-checkconf file and we created our zone files, and then we did a bunch of checks. But let's make sure that we understand, you know, all the things that we've done so far. So we'll go through them real quick. So we'll take a look at the named-checkconf file first. And I'll just go down through everything that I did here. All right, so I commented out this line because we want to listen for everybody, not just do some testing. We We also allowed query from anywhere. That starts off as localhost, and I had it originally, I think earlier on in the video, that I added the subnet, but I changed it to any because that's the way that you would do it to begin with. Although certainly you could, for limited testing, just put in your subnet or your address space. We're not doing recursion with this server. There's nobody else to talk to. I'm not doing DNS at all. Oh, the other thing that I did is I got rid of, I just deleted the line for IP version 6. All right, so now we've got my two zones, and this is where the punctuation got me in the earlier errors. So we're type master, and then here is the name of the file. I also included the full pathway. You can leave that out because remember there's a directory above that. There's a directory variable that tells it where to find the files. But I couldn't remember where I was, so I just went back and stuck that in there. Here is the reverse zone, same thing. And the file name just has to be the exact same file that you're using. And I think that's it. Okay, so now let's take a look at the forward zone. And well, let's do it this way. Let's do, there we go. Okay, so the important lines, the important line is the origin line that specifies what you're going to attach to the end of every entry here. And so you can do it without the origin line, but then all of your statements have to have the full domain name in there. All of the things in the parentheses are specific to the configuration for the name server, all the timers. And then we've got our individual records with the name server defined, and then the address records for all of the clients. And so you specify the name of the client, and the origin allows that to be filled out. And then of course we've got the IP addresses. Just for fun, I added a canonical name entry. Okay, so let's take a look at the reverse zone file. There we go. And it's very same thing, right? You got a TTL, we've got the origin statement, but it's weird, right? It's backwards. And then we've got all the timers associated with this, and then the name server defined, and the pointer records, which are a reference from the IP address to the name. So we've got it now both ways. All right, and just to remind ourselves that we did the we used. Let's see, where am I? You got to be to use named the check zones and check configs. You got to be in the directory. So earlier I had done this. Check zone, and then root.com, and then right, and we got OK. And I had also done the reverse also. Okay. Whoops. I forgot to add the reverse zone. Uh-oh. Oh, for heaven's sakes. There we go. That looks better. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. We'll make it clear. There we go. Okay. So that's how you use check zone. If I go over to etc, I can also do a named check config, and with no errors returned, that tells me it's pretty good file. All right. So we ran the service. Okay, and everything was good. Let's see. With regard to the configuration for the server, right? I changed the name of the server, which you can see down here, and then of course the IP address to 172.16.0.1. So this is the name of this server is ns1.bruce.com. So we did that with the host name control command. And let's also make sure that other folks can talk to the server. It doesn't matter what you do in the file if you've got, firewall D or SE Linux blocking your config. So some other things that that had to be done to get this server up and running. I can't remember if I did them on this config. We'll find out here in a second. Well, I'll put it at the top. There we go. So what we're going to do is open up ports for the DNS requests to come in, and then we're going to add DNS to the firewall services allowed list if we haven't already. So there we go. Okay, so it looks like I already did it, and we'll, just to be complete, we'll add this guy here. And then we're also going to do add service equal to DNS. Do I have the syntax right? I do. Okay. Now what I want to be able to see is that when I do there we go. So we want to see DNS in that list. Okay. So we've got the DNS. Well, we can do, let's do this too. There we go. Okay. So we can see that named is running, right, to the Berkeley Internet name domain, right, bind. And we are running. And the only thing that, the only thing that's kind of quasi-error here is that it couldn't get the DNS keys, but we're not doing DNSSEC anyway, so who cares? But we've got successes here. So everything looks pretty good for DNS or named. So let's do a couple of tests. And I think, I may have mentioned this earlier, but dig and NSLOOKUP are the two really big ones that we can use here. Now I can do a command line sort of thing here. I can say something like this, right on the command line, and there's the answer that comes back from my forward zone file. This is the forward lookup, and we can see that I asked it about ns1.bruce.com and it gave me the IP address. I can also make it interactive, so I can say like this and then like that. Now this is an important idea here because I'm sitting on my name server, the one that I created. I'm not a client at this point, although I guess I sort of am because I am querying the server, but I'm not an external node, right? I'm just querying the server. If you can't query the server when you're sitting on the box itself, then other folks outside of this particular VM or your particular host are not going to be able to query it either. All right, so let's do another forward lookup. That's not going to work. Okay, so this comes back with 172.16.0.2, and of course that's correct. So those are the forward lookups. But if we take a look at let me log in here, and we'll just take a look at the forward lookup file, because we put some other stuff in there, remember? Okay, I've got this canonical entry here. So I just did the two forward lookups, NS1 and client1. But that Dr. H, what does that actually refer to? Well, that's a canonical name that's a pointer to client1. So let's see what happens if I do Dr. H. And what this comes back with is the node that this particular canonical name is associated with. So everything looks pretty good so far. Everything in my forward zone looks like it's working. Can I do the reverse zone? So the reverse zone would be, I'm going to put in an IP address, and this should give me the name associated with the IP address. And there we have it, ns1.bruce.com. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's try the only other entry in the file. There we go, client1.bruce.com. So it looks like, at least sitting here on my server, everything is working pretty well. All right, so let's go over to the client. Okay, now, by way of configuration, the only thing that I've done on the client, besides booting it up, is change the IP address, right? So I'm on the same network. And I changed the, oh, I haven't actually done the host name yet. So we could do that. We could say, so this is the same thing that you would do, spell it right. There we go. Oh. Whoa. All right. So we did that. I don't really need it because I'm on the client side. I mean, who cares? But that sort of completes all of the operations. Now, the only other thing that I did was edit the same file that I did on the server, which is this guy here. And I guess maybe I didn't. Well, that's okay. That's okay. So I could edit resolve.config, but this gives me a chance to show you another way to do this. So let's say that I have NSLOOKUP, but I don't know what the server is, or I want to pick a particular server to query. Now I could put it in resolve.config. I could let the network manager solve it, or I could just set it with NSLOOKUP. So what I'm going to do here is this. I'm going to say your server is that right there. Okay, so now let's do the same queries that we did from the client side. So we'll try the server first. Very nice, so that comes back from the server. And let's try that works. So 1602, very good. Now let's try the reverse. So there's the name associated with that IP address. And there we go. There's the name associated with this IP address. So there we go. There's our client talking to the server and pulling up all the same kinds of queries and answers that we did when we were sitting resident on the server. But you don't have to believe me because we can prove it. So I'm going to capture on VMnet. On VMnet 8, which happens to be the NAT interface, and I'm going to filter on DNS. So we've got a capture going right now, and let's go ahead and see if these captures are going across the wire between the server. And I'll just do two of them really quick. Okay, and we'll do the IP address associated with the client. Now what's happening here is that we're using the DNS protocol, or the protocol associated with DNS, to make our queries. And remember that it's very, very structured, and we should be able to see all of the answers and the queries. So here is our original query. So again, if we go back and see the first one that I did when I was sitting here, when I was going to do the capture, I did ns1.bruce.com, and then we did the reverse for the client. So here is the first, well, let's see. We want, yep, here's the first query that goes out, and we can see it right there. What is the IP address that goes along with ns1.bruce.com? And the server comes back and said, well, I've got a couple of answers for you. There we go. Okay. And by the way, here's the name server. And then we turned right around and said, well, let's see, we made the request again. There we go. Whoops. Here is the reverse lookup that we went and did. what is this IP address, and now you know why we structure that file in the way that we do. Take a look at this, the format of this particular response. And then the server comes back and says, oh, by the way, that's client1.bruce.com. Well, there you go. All right, I think that about wraps it up for this particular build. There are lots and lots of resources. You can look online. There's lots and lots of folks that have done this. But I sometimes find it confusing because there are so many of them. And somebody did it, but you didn't get to see the actual operation. And so that's why I decided to do this. But there are lots and lots of other resources out there. Don't forget the man pages for all the config files that are out there, the RFCs, and of course references for bind as well. So this has been a CentOS 8 DNS build. We did named-checkconf in /etc. We went to var named and we did our forward and reverse zones. We did our testing with named-config check or checkconfig and checkzone. You have to be in the directories to do those. We dropped the firewall rules, or at least we modified the firewall rules to let DNS requests in. We did a lot of editing in the named-config file to pick up requests that were coming into the server, and that's also where we specified our zones. And then on the client side, we just pointed it at the server. And now we know there's three ways really to work with NSLOOKUP. You can do it interactively, you can do them as one command, or you can run NSLOOKUP and then specify the server that you want to look at. Well, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Like and subscribe if I helped, and I certainly hope that I did. May your packets always reach their destinations, even if they're just going between your client and server.